Hi, you may be thinking, why does Elliot look like a 1940s lesbian? Well, it's because it's today's subject. Today, I am going to talk about Alice Paul, a suffragette pioneer. She is the one who helped women's suffrage and actually led to women being able to vote. So that's really cool. First, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction. Then we're going to do early life and her education. Then we're going to delve into her early activism in England, her return to the United States, and her suffrage work, and then Silent Sentinels protests, achievements, post-suffrage's work, and her legacy. She's a very complex woman who did a lot of stuff, so it's really cool. And I will put an image of her right here so you can see who she is, and I'll add images whenever I need to. Depends on how well I edit, but we'll see. First, a small introduction as to who Alice Paul is. So Alice Paul was born on January 11, 1885 in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and she died on July 9th, 1977 in Moorestown, New Jersey. She was an American women's suffrage leader and proposed the Equal Rights Amendments to the US Constitution. So she's really important. You really need to know that. Her early life and education. So, like I said before, she was born in New Jersey. She was raised on Paul Slade, a 2,065-acre farm in Burlington County. So basically, she was living that cottagecore farm life, which is very different from the advocating women's right that you'd see in her later life. So she was the eldest of 4 children: Alice, Helen, Parry, not Harry, weirdly enough, and William. Her parents were William Mickle Paul I, and her mother was Tacy Perry Paul. Her father was also a successful businessman and the president of Burlington County Trust Company. And her mother, she was also a feminist. She was a suffragist and one of the first women to attend Swarthmore College. So feminism was still quite present in their family, even though it was the late 1890s and stuff like that. Family life. She was raised in a strict Quaker household and had strong values of equality and social justice thrust upon her. So she was raised in quite a progressive household. And she graduated from Swarthmore College in 1905 with a biology degree. So that's quite interesting. She was a woman in STEM. She pursued graduate studies in New York School of Philanthropy, which is now the Columbia University School of Social Work. So she pivoted a bit from her STEM background. She then earned a master's in sociology from University of Pennsylvania in 1907. So my girl has been working. She studied then economics and sociology at the University of Birmingham in London School of Economics from 1907 to 1910, and she completed her PhD in economics from University of Pennsylvania in 1912 and made a dissertation on women's legal status. So she was, even during her studies, very, how would you say, thoughtful about women and wanted equal rights. Now, let's move on to her early activism in England, which is quite interesting. She started in England and didn't start in America. So she joins the Women's Rights Social and Political Union, the WSPU, which kind of sounds like USPU, in England of 1907, where she worked closely with a woman called Emmeline and another woman called Christabel, and they were leaders of the British suffragist movement. So she was very close with British feminists. How close? We don't particularly know. Her life, she had homophobic things happen to her, but she most likely was bisexual, which is why I'm wearing this. So she worked closely, like I said, with these 2 women and participated in militant tactics, including window smashing and arson. So yeah, she wasn't really being peaceful. She had a little bit of a rebel side, a violent side to her. which is adding a bit of spice in her life, I guess. She was then arrested, obviously, on 7 different occasions from 1909 to 1910, and she was put in jail 3 times. She had a very tumultuous era in England. At least she was fighting for what she was believing in. So that's good. She then met Lucy Burns, a fellow American activist, during one of her arrests, because nothing says bonding material like being arrested together. She then engaged in a hunger strike as a form of protest while she was being imprisoned. She was then subjected to force feeding, a traumatic experience that only strengthened her resolve. Because yeah, in prison, they're not going to be nice to you. And in prison, she learned about many militant protest strategies that she then later applied in the US. So she returned to the US in 1910, bringing a new and more radical approach to the American suffrage movement, where she then joined the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the NASA with a W. In 1912, she was appointed the chair of NASA Congressional Committee in Washington, D.C., where she then organized the very famous women's suffrage procession in Washington, D.C. on March 3rd, 1913. She paraded with other 8,000 marchers, including notable figures like Inez Milholland. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's fine. She then founded the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage, the CU, in April 1913 with Lucy Burns, her friend. The CU then split from the NASA due to disagreements about how to go by with their protests, basically. So she then founded another party called the National Women's Party, the NWP, or NWOOP, in 1916 by then merging the CW and the Women's Party, like making it bigger, basically. Where she then adopted a very militant and confrontational approach to achieving women's suffrage. She did not hesitate to get violent. She was violent. She had her inner rage in her. So, she initiated the Silent Sentinel protests at the White House on January 10th, 1917, which was the first group to picket the White House for any type of protest for over 18 months. So yeah, she was dedicated, which is good, but she was dedicated. So the protesters used provocative signs and slogans targeting President Wilson and continued their protests during World War I, leading to a lot of public backlash because they were seen as being unpatriotic. So there were over 500 women that were arrested during those protests. And Paul was also arrested on October 20th, 1917, and was sentenced to 7 months in jail. So yeah, she knew a lot about the prison system. She was then imprisoned in Occoquan Workhouse in Virginia under very harsh conditions. She endured again force feeding and was threatened with transfer to a psychiatric ward, which at the time weren't great. They didn't really care, ironically, about the mental health of their patients. There was also the Night Terror in November 15, 1917, where the guards brutally attacked and abused a lot of the suffragist prisoners, and Paul's imprisonment and treatment garnered significant media attention and public sympathy because of what she endured. So at least she got something out of this brutal period in her life. So then later on, with the pressure from the protests and public opinion, this all led to a political shift where Wilson declared his support for women's suffrage on January 9th, 1918. The suffrage amendment then passed on May 21st, 1919, and the Senate approved this only 2 months later, I think, June 4th, something like that, 1919. And Paul and her movement launched an extensive campaign for state ratification. So Tennessee became the 36th state to join and ratify on August 18th, 1920, and then the 19th Amendment was officially adopted on August 26th, 1920, granting them the right to vote. Granting women, of course, which is absolutely amazing and just monumental for a whole country to do that. So now let's move on to her post-suffrage work. So she wrote the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923 and proposed to eliminate all legal distinctions on account of sex. She then earned a law degree from Washington College Law at American University in 1922, and she received a doctorate in civil law in 1928. She then founded the World Women Party in Geneva, Switzerland in 1938, and she also worked a lot for gender equality, worked for the United Nations a lot, and she successfully lobbied for the inclusion of the Sexual Discrimination Clause in 1964 for the Civil Rights Act. However, she then suffered a stroke in 1974 and died on July 1977 in New Jersey. She was then, after her death, inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1979, and her childhood home was designated as a National Historic Landmark. So that's pretty cool. In 1991. Then the US Treasury announced in 2016 that her portrait would appear on the back of the redesigned $10 bill. So that's very, very cool. And she was then portrayed in a film in 2004 produced by HBO, I think, called Iron-Jawed Angels, which I watched, and it's pretty good. Yeah, I mean, it's good. She is still remembered as a key strategist of the women's suffrage movement and tirelessly advocated for women's rights. And her methods and dedications inspire women today. So yeah, Alice Paul is quite a complicated woman. She is also quite a powerful woman, and I like her a lot. Feel free to give me a 20 out of 20 and rate this video as the highest video possible. Bye bye!